The Blue Mountains Center of Meditation is pleased to present Mahatma Gandhi, His Search for Truth by Eknath Easwaran, read for you by Bazely. In India, Mahatma Gandhi is officially Father of the Nation. Under his leadership, India attained freedom from the British Empire through a 30-year campaign based on complete non-violence that ended with both sides allied in respect and friendship. That alone would secure his place in history books, but not necessarily his place in world spirituality. For that, we need to understand why he belongs not so much to 20th century history as to the timeless lineage of the world's great mystics, kith and kin with Francis of Assisi and Teresa of Avila. More than that, we need to understand what his special contribution to this lineage is. The mystics, though they teach universals, are also each unique. Each has an intuition or insight, so to speak, a particular message that arises as a deep response to the needs of the times. And here Gandhi shines like a beacon. He showed us the way out of the greatest problem of our age, that of the downward spiral of violence in every sphere of life that threatens to drag civilization back into barbarism if we do not learn to master it. Most precious of all, like every great spiritual figure but belonging to our own times, he gives us a glimpse of our evolutionary potential as human beings. He shows us that the spiritual life, far from being otherworldly, means living to one's highest ideals and giving full expression to every facet of personality in a life of selfless service. Even before he began his work in India, Gandhi was charged with being a saint dabbling in politics. Rather, he insisted it was the other way round. He was an ordinary man with ordinary human frailties, trying his best to apply basic ideals in whatever field his passion for service led him. We need to think of him as an explorer, almost a tinkerer like Edison, constantly experimenting with his character and conduct in search of what he called truth, in the midst of the messy details of real life. As he does so, he's constantly trying to explain it all to himself and to others. His writings comprise a lifelong conversation between the seeker after truth and an endless train of critics, not the least of whom was Gandhi himself. What did you mean by this? Why did you do that? When he says he is not a visionary, but a practical idealist, he means that he knows precisely where he is going, but is constantly testing his next step. Most of us who have survived a college education probably think of books as a kind of edifice, or at least as a series of snapshots. But Gandhi's words are a river. His collected works fill 100 volumes, but only one of these, Satyagraha in South Africa, was written as a book. Virtually all the rest comprise speeches, letters, recorded conversations, and the brief columns in the weekly papers in which he opened his heart to an eager nation. Speaking mostly to Indians, he takes a good deal for granted. I must have read him weekly from college on, and it was like watching him think aloud. It makes an extraordinarily rich story, one of the 20th century's greatest dramas. But it is also, for all of that, a flood of details. We need a way to navigate through all of this, and I think our best guide is Gandhi himself, but not Gandhi the writer or leader. We need a sense of Gandhi the man, and that requires first a little stage setting. Gandhi's India. When Gandhi was born in 1869, India had already been under foreign domination for centuries. Remarkably, for the last 100-odd years of this period, it lay in the grip not of an ordinary conqueror, but of a mercantile operation, the British East India Company. Licensed by the Crown to pursue its fortunes by virtually any means it liked, including raising its own armies and waging war, the company got a foothold on the subcontinent early in the 18th century, and by 1757 had managed to secure control of the whole of North India. Sometimes in visible authority, often content to rule behind puppet regimes, it set about systematically draining the wealth of India into private hands. The fortunes made were staggering, even to contemporary eyes. Historians have observed that Great Britain's place in the Industrial Revolution was essentially financed by the looting of India. The economic burden of this on Indians was equally staggering, though in those days no one was really looking. Within a generation, cities became nightmarish extremes of wealth and poverty, with Calcutta, built by the company, the most notorious example. But most of India lives in villages, and their consequences were worse. Forced to grow crops for export instead of local use, and then taxed heavily for the privilege of doing so, hundreds of thousands of villages under company control lost all capacity to sustain themselves. By British figures, approximately 400,000 Indians died of starvation in the second quarter of the 19th century, but 5 million in the third quarter, and an appalling 15 million between 1875 and 1900, the years in which Gandhi would come of age. In 1857, after a century of this kind of exploitation, the spontaneous mutiny of some native troops exploded into open rebellion all over North India. That the fury spread so rapidly and erupted into such violence is a measure of how deep India's anger ran. But the mutiny was a collection of local explosions without unity or coordination. The company put it down like a series of brush fires, and a bloodbath of reprisals followed. The tragedy haunted the rest of British rule. Fear just short of panic ran to the marrow on both sides. For the British, it was clear that survival depended on keeping India divided, and on putting down even a hint of insubordination immediately and ruthlessly enough to teach a lesson. To Indians, it seemed equally clear that with a little more violence next time, they might succeed. Fear and mistrust smouldered just under the surface on both sides, ready to burst into flame. The near success of an accidental rebellion also made it obvious in London that so precious a possession as India could not remain solely in commercial hands. A few months later, with the wounds of the mutiny still raw and open, India became an imperial colony, the jewel in the crown, and the British government stepped in to do things right. The long-term effects of this kind of domination on consciousness may not be obvious to those who have not lived under such conditions. After 2 or 3 generations, beyond the political deprivation and economic exploitation, a people begins to lose confidence in itself. Indians now grew up in the belief that they were inferior, born to be ruled over, not fit to be masters in their own home. To survive, they learned to ape the Englishman. The best and brightest went to London for their education and returned to careers in the bureaucracies of British India, or occasionally to terrorism or revolution. In any case, it was axiomatic that any road to success, personal or national, had to be by imitation of Western ways. Into this world, just 12 years after India became a crown colony, a boy named Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born. He appears to have been, as he says, a very average youth, timid, inarticulate, painfully shy. Like everyone else whose family could afford it, he was sent off to London as a teenager to learn to become an English gentleman and to study law.